Hi, I'm Danielle Dufault, and you're watching Animalogic. Today, we're going to try something a little different, and we're going to talk about the history of T-Rex, or maybe how we perceive T-Rex through the times.
First Tyrannosaurus rex officially described was discovered in the Hell Creek Formation in Montana in 1902 by Barnum Brown and Richard Lull. They dug out 36 bones, including a lower jaw, a femur, a few vertebrae, and the pubic bone. All of them were so massive that Henry Field Osborn, the scientist who described it and gave it its name, said, "I propose to make this animal the type of the new genus Tyrannosaurus," in reference to its size, which greatly exceeds that of any carnivorous land animal hitherto described. I'm sure he sounded just like that.
So it was Osborn's colleague, William D. Matthews, who got to be the first to ever illustrate Tyrannosaurus rex in 1905. To have that feather in your cap.
The body was very upright, almost like a kangaroo, with a tail that would drag on the ground when it walked, and tiny little legs that probably wouldn't help it run very fast. But hey, it was the first ever attempt at figuring out what they looked like based on a specimen that was only about 10% complete.
Honestly, this is the first T-Rex ever drawn, and I've seen worse, really, and much more modern. I'd say that they've done an amazing job considering what they were working with. And you can see in the illustration that they've colored in a little darker all the bones that they actually found. And that's exactly what they were working with. You know, some parts of the legs, some parts of the pubis, the jaw, an arm, and some vertebrae. So everything else is kind of extrapolation off of other things that we kind of knew about. But everything back then was gray area in terms of knowledge in paleontology. So, you know, the tail, that was all estimated. The rest of that, the hips, just a guess. But what really surprises me is that they did associate that arm with the rest of the skeleton. It must have been, you know, pretty obvious that it belonged to just one individual and that it wasn't mixed in with a bunch of other bones of other creatures. Because if it were me, I would have seen this tiny arm and assumed that it was a baby or a totally different animal's arm that got mixed in. But no, they worked out what kind of crazy anatomy this animal must have had to have tiny little arms and gigantic bones. Yeah. It's incredible.
In 1906, Osborn used other fossils for extra context, and L.M. Sterling produced an updated version of the illustration.
So the same skeleton and generally the same pose. But as you can see, this one here is a lot more detailed. He used a more traditional anatomical illustration style, and this is something that I still use in my work. And you can also see that he has scaled these bones to each other a little more carefully. So I think this was after having a year of spending a lot of time around these bones. This was more than just coloring in a general map. This was detailing what is present and, you know, what was assumed to be there for the rest of the skeleton.
But of course, these are just skeletons. What we want to see is how people imagined the muscles, the skin, and the integument that covered them. It was only 10 years later when the museum commissioned the legendary Charles Knight to paint a full version of the T-Rex based on their fossils. The result was this.
Okay, this one is a classic. Charles R. Knight. He is one of my own paleo art heroes. I mean, anyone who does this kind of thing reveres his work. T-Rex at the time was really perceived as a gargantuan reptile. And it's interesting to see what kind of current influences were used for depicting this animal. And you can actually point it out pretty easily. Some of the biggest reptiles we have today are iguanas. If you look at the way the mouth and the cheek are reconstructed in this piece, like that big cheek scale, that's an iguana. Even the way that the mouth closes, the way that there's lips on it, like scaly lips, just like an iguana. We're gonna come back to that later because the lips is a hot topic. But even the scales on the body, the color green, the stripy tail, All of that screams iguana, and this trend lasted for a long time.
It still had all the major issues of the skeleton-only illustrations, plus one little added mistake. Charles, who had been drawing other theropods, added a third finger onto the T-Rex, assuming that T-Rex would have the same number of fingers as its cousins. Logical enough to me. Despite having an incorrect number of fingers, this painting rocked the nation's socks off and was the inspiration for the 1918 film, The Ghost of Slumber Mountain, where a T-Rex fights a Triceratops.
All right, so next, we've got Dinosaurs Go to the Movies, and this is gonna be T-Rex's big debut on the silver screen. And it was silver screen back then, because this is 1918. So let's give this a little watch. It's a stop motion animation. Oh, you've got Triceratops just walking around, bumping things with their giant horns. You know, that's the classic T-Rex, dragging his tail around, lumbering about, kind of a slow, powerful predator. He looks so smug, always licking his chops. It's like my cat. This isn't important or anything, but the little like licking his chops on the side thing, probably couldn't do that. I know it's pedantic, but the hyoid bone, so that's the bone that supports the tongue, that was found in one of T-Rex's cousins, Eutyrannus. And based on the studies done on that, it was indicated that they probably couldn't stick out their tongue. So it was used for internal manipulation and helping to hold on to prey and other things. And obviously shoving food down its throat. But licking its chops, probably not.
The Ghost of Slumber Mountain was a massive hit and made $100,000 in the box office on a budget of $3,000. In today's terms, that's roughly a $2 million return on a $60,000 investment. The T-Rex was the main attraction, and a star was born.
So after that movie, T-Rex managed to get a few more minor roles into some other lower budget productions. But it wasn't until 1933 that Tyrannosaurus Rex was featured on the big screen. We're talking worldwide blockbuster, 1933's King Kong. So let's watch a clip of that. So like the scales on T-Rex here, they're very detailed, and I gotta say they look almost more crocodilian than iguanodon-y. Is that a word? It is now. So, you know, the idea of T-Rex was continuing to evolve. And maybe, I think around this time we were starting to think of crocodilians as a closely related group to dinosaurs. Oh no! Oh, this is brutal. Ooh. And King Kong broke its jaw. And he's playing with it because of course he is. So for a lot of people around the world, I'd say most people, this was their first view of T-Rex. Because if they weren't keeping up with scientific publications, which wasn't easy at the time, no internet, or they couldn't go to the AMNH, then they really couldn't see T-Rex, you know? So for them, this is what imprinted on everyone's mind when you would say T-Rex. It was this big blockbuster movie. King Kong was no small production either. It cost about $600,000, but it made about $10 million in revenue, which in today's world would be about $250 million. Totally worth the investment. So who do you think would win? One T-Rex or 100 regular-sized gorillas? Let me know in the comments.
7 years later, in 1940, the bar was officially raised by no other than Walt Disney Productions.
This is Disney's Fantasia. And this film is one of my favorites, and I drove my family absolutely crazy watching this daily for probably a couple years as a kid. I was one of those. So what really sets this film apart from everything that came before is that they consulted with an actual paleontologist to advise on the look and the movement and just the whole aspect of how these dinosaurs would move and live. Well, they're so dynamic. Oh my goodness, look at these plodding long necks. Well, that's weird. So there's a bunch of animals here that like, maybe they went through a warp hole and landed all in one place to fight to the death. Because a lot of these animals did not coexist at the same time or place. One of my favorite like little facts in paleontology is that we live closer in time to T-Rex than T-Rex lived to Stegosaurus. And here we have them fighting. And oh my gosh, it's so good. It's such a dynamic battle, but this never could have happened. So the T-Rex, as usual, is still green. It is also still the very ferocious predator that we've been seeing all along, but maybe even more ferocious by the fact that you see its teeth at all times. Up until now, we've been seeing the kind of iguana-style scaly lips that cover the teeth. And obviously, when he opens his jaw, then you see them. So one of the big design changes we're seeing here in this T-Rex, like yes, it's still a green tail dragger that's really upright and kind of looks like a man in a suit, but it's lipless. So we're no longer going with the iguanodon, scaly lips kind of look. This one here, you see his teeth out at all times, whether he's gnashing or roaring.
In the painting world, Rudolf Zallinger painted a mural called The Age of Reptiles for the Yale Peabody Museum.
So around the same time that Disney's Fantasia came out, there was a lot of paleo art that was starting to pop up. And sometimes the trends in reconstructing T-Rex were pretty variable. Some of them already looked antiquated by this time.
The T-Rex was included as a gigantic but seemingly slow and awkward beast. Its skin was like that of a lizard, and it seemed like it walked around with its tail on the ground.
I do love the big beefy leg. The big beefy leg, it's like big, strong, powerful. But then it's got like this big balloon gut. It's interesting. It's definitely got its charm, don't get me wrong. I love Salinger's work. And yet at the same time, along with Disney's Fantasia, Charles Knight made another painting of T-Rex. And this time, the prompt might have been, what's the coolest thing you can imagine ever happening in the history of the world? And so he painted two T-Rexes fighting. Now these T-Rexes, they are looking a little more forward-thinking. I'd say that they're following the more dynamic and less lumbering kind of idea of what a T-Rex would move like. What I find a little weird about this one, though, is the long, snaky whip tail, which we have no idea. Maybe, I can't remember, but maybe at that point we might not have had a full T-Rex tail. We have that now, but at this point in time, I'm gonna guess we didn't. So they were still using kind of the kangaroo tail, but this one's snaky.
This idea of the T-Rex stayed the same until the 70s, a period we called the Dinosaur Renaissance. A paleontologist named John Ostrom suggested that dinosaurs weren't sluggish lizards, but rather smart and fast-moving beasts, more closely related to birds than to iguanas, and that they might be social, unlike most modern reptiles. His colleague, Robert Bacher, went even further, arguing that they were warm-blooded animals. These new ideas led to a little obscure book from 1990 that was then adapted into a tiny movie called Jurassic Park.
This movie changed how we think of dinosaurs in all the ways. Not only were they, sustaining their image as being gigantic, terrifying movie monsters, but they were getting smarter and faster. All of this is kind of a reflection of a total change in how we perceive dinosaurs at the time. It's known as the Dinosaur Renaissance, where we were associating dinosaurs more closely in evolution to birds. So birds are fast, they're intelligent, they are, much more active than, say, a lizard, for example. The Jurassic Park T-Rex is also showing that the way that we think of T-Rex's teeth is starting to change as well. Because you can see that it's got kind of like a gummy flap around its mouth. So you could call them lips, you could debate that one way or another, but it's no longer exactly like the bare teeth all the way out like a crocodile anymore. So this vision of the T-Rex, it stuck around for a long time. I'd say a lot of people still think this is the standard of T-Rex. And who can blame them? It looks totally amazing.
Jurassic Park was released soon after two well-preserved specimens, Wankel and Sue, were discovered. These were the two most complete specimens found up to that point. It was such a big deal that even penguins went to see them. Later, biomechanical studies showed that this was very likely an overcorrection. The T-Rex was a big predator and mostly walked and ran with its body in a horizontal position, like a T, and it was probably not very agile.
In 1999, the BBC released Walking with Dinosaurs, the original one, I mean. And to this day, this is still what most people look to for a litmus test of is a nature documentary about dinosaurs good or not. They are all still compared to this standard. So this is showing a T-Rex who's fighting an Ankylosaurus in probably the Hell Creek Formation, because that's where they lived at the time. And so this is definitely approaching it from a more naturalistic, factual point of view, using science and sticking to it as best they could to create a narrative that would, inspire people to watch. And what this documentary was really doing differently from everything else we've shown before is that they were framing it like an actual nature documentary, trying to show it, as a real day in the life of these animals, the same way that we might depict lions on the Serengeti. Hey, kitty. Now, jumping all the way to 2023, we've got Apple TV's Prehistoric Planet 2, which is showing something that wasn't really depicted in media before. We've got a fuzzy T-Rex. Another big difference that we're seeing is that this is no longer about trying to create a movie monster to terrify people. They are terrifying in their own right as natural creatures. Showing their own proposed behavior is, in a lot of ways, more fascinating to a lot of people than something that's just, born to trample.
The debate over whether T-Rex had feathers had heated up since 1996, when a theropod called Sinosauropteryx was confirmed to have had feathers. The feathered Caudipteryx and Protoarchaeopteryx were discovered soon after, suggesting this was a common adaptation in theropods, especially among smaller species. In most dinosaurs, feathers were likely used for insulation rather than flight, and this insulation would have been particularly useful to smaller dinos who didn't have the hardware for flight. Then in 2012, Eutyrannus, a large theropod and a close but older relative of T-Rex, was discovered to have had feathers, similar to those of an emu. This added weight to the idea that T-Rex might have had feathers, at least on parts of its body or during certain stages of its life.
But by this point, it's totally valid to start exploring, what a feathered T-Rex could look like. In the past several years, there's been a lot of studies and evidence that both advocate for and against the idea of T-Rex having feathers. Now, some of that is the idea that maybe the smaller tyrannosaurids and theropods would probably have some kind of feathers, but they would lose the need for that insulation the larger they got, which is something that you see in mammals today. But dinosaurs were different beasts. Some of the evidence that we've found against the feathery T-Rex theory is that we have fossilized skin impressions of T-Rex from different parts of the body. The idea is that these scales, they wouldn't be able to occupy the same space as the structures necessary to be feathery. So those fossils hint at them being scaly, not feathery.
We still don't know whether T-Rex had feathers, but since many of its relatives did, it's considered likely that it had at least some. It's possible that they were only present during juvenile stages or limited to certain areas of the body. What we did get some closure on is the whole lip debate. We're now pretty sure that the teeth weren't exposed like those of a croc.
In 2023, a new paper came out in Science by Cullen et al. Talking about teeth development and how enamel works in teeth. both in dinosaurs and in extant animals. What was found is that T-Rex probably had lips, or at least some kind of tissue covering the teeth, because it turns out that enamel breaks down when it's exposed to air, so it needs to stay sealed in with lots of saliva. I'd like to talk about the Tyrannosaurus Rex that I got to reconstruct and paint. This is the Black Beauty T-Rex. This is a famous one here in Canada. It's a fairly complete skeleton, and it's called Black Beauty because its bones are pitch black. I got to reconstruct this for the Fukui Prefectural Dinosaur Museum in Japan, and this ended up being part of their dinosaur exhibit all about the North American Cretaceous. And it was a huge honor to do that. So they didn't want a feathery T-Rex, and that's fine and perfectly scientifically acceptable. Either way, right now we don't have enough evidence one way or another, but I'm excited to know what's gonna come next. So there's going to be a lot of physical differences between my reconstruction and what was done in the early 1900s. For example, it was in a much more horizontal position, still very capable of rearing up and raising its head, but its body's balance was more centered around the hips, and the tail and the head would balance each other out a little bit. The tail itself is definitely not dragging. It's holding itself up nice and firm. There's a lot of muscles that run all the way down the tail. If you did like a cross section of that tail, it would be way more round than flat, like we used to see in the early 1900s. And finally, we're going to take a look at the latest depiction of T-Rex. And that's with BBC Earth's Walking with Dinosaurs. Not the 1999 one, this is 2025. It came out last week. I haven't seen this yet. I've been saving it for this moment. Okay. Oh, wow. Yeah, look at all that integument all over its head. It's got some keratin patches over the eyes. Its mouth is sealed shut. I love that the first thing they show you isn't a T-Rex with his mouth wide open. Yeah, this looks like a natural animal. Yeah, and just like in my illustration, you can see that, its spine is held much more horizontal than it used to be. And even so, it doesn't look like it's going to tip over because its muscles and bones are well distributed for its weight. Yeah, this is fantastic. I'm excited to see more of this. I think I'm gonna have to go binge this tonight. So I want to be upfront here that there is so much research out there on T-Rex. It might be the best known dinosaur of all time. And if you wanted to try and track all the evidence for and against things like lips or scales or feathers, you'd be bouncing around the internet from one paper to another for hours. We couldn't exactly encapsulate all of that here, so we're giving you the short notes, but we're trying to do it justice.
2025 was an amazing year for paleontology. There were lots of new findings that deepened our understanding of some species and totally new discoveries that introduced us to whole new species. 44 new species were discovered, almost one a week. We know it's basically a full-time job to keep track of all these discoveries, so we're doing the work for you and showing you some of the biggest discoveries that you might have missed. Let's start with the kings, the Tyrannosaurids. We have a brand new North American killer, the Nanotyrannus. Nanotyrannus was for a long time thought to be just a young T-Rex. They lived at the same place, at the same time, and looked pretty similar, except that Nanotyrannus was much smaller. Of course, at the time, or at least until now, we didn't know what the entire growth stages of Tyrannosaurs were, so the assumption that it could have been a young T-Rex was also quite valid. Their fossil record shows that it was about 5 meters long and weighed about 700 kilograms. Pretty giant compared to us, but next to a T-Rex, it looked like a little minion. For comparison, T-Rex was over twice as long and was 10 times as heavy. But back in October, in a paper by Zano and Napoli, it was revealed that a specimen once believed to be a young T-Rex was a totally different species. An incredible specimen called the dueling dinosaurs was discovered in 2006. Unfortunately, it was not in a museum repository and it was privately owned. So until kind of recently, this specimen was not accessible for study. But that has all changed, as you can see by this scientific study by Zano et al. The dueling dinosaurs is this fantastic and complete fossil preservation of a Triceratops totally intertwined with what looks like a juvenile T-Rex, or maybe a young or teen T-Rex. Some people argued that it was just a juvenile T-Rex. Others argued that its features were completely new and that it deserved its own name. They proposed Nanotyrannus. And trust me, fires have started over this. To add fuel to the fire, because of course there's more, another skeleton was discovered that was assumed to be a juvenile or teen T-Rex. Teen Rex? Teen Rex. And it was called Jane. So this new paper by Zano and Napoli claims that it's got a few main points that make it indisputable that this creature could not have possibly grown into a full-grown T-Rex. So let's go over those real quick. So 1, they did histology on the limb bones of this dinosaur because it was finally in their access and they granted themselves the right to be able to cut it. There's a lot of ways to do this pretty non-destructively these days, so don't cry for the bones. They'll be fine. Anyway, by doing thin sections of the bones, they found that there's growth rings inside that indicate a full-grown individual. These growth rings were tightly packed, which means that year after year you can kind of see that growth slow down. And once it reaches adulthood, the growth rings basically stop. It had all of those features. How do you fight that? It's like cutting down a tree. Point number 2 is that it had more tooth sockets than a T-Rex. And I mean like any of the T-Rex skulls ever discovered at any stage of growth. These ones in particular, it didn't match up. And these things are something that gets, cemented in your skull from a very, very young developmental age. So also pretty hard to fight. Number 3 is that the pathways of the nerves and the sinuses in the skull, they really didn't follow the same paths as any of the T-Rexes that they analyzed. They dug deep for this info. They had to CT scan these skulls and compare it to the CT scans of a bunch of other T-Rexes. I've done CT scan work. It's not quick, it's not easy, but it is worth it. And the evidence doesn't lie. The bone don't lie. And for another point, the arms were longer and thinner than any other known T-Rex specimen, at least relatively to their body size. So something was fishy, and it sounds like some people had the right idea all along. Not gonna say who. You know who you are. And it wasn't just Nanotyrannus that came onto the scene, it brought its whole fam. The different Nanotyrannus specimens were split into 2 species. Nanotyrannus lancensis, which is the one that I got to see in the Cleveland Museum of Natural History, and the other member of the Nanotyrannus family was Jane, so no longer a young T-Rex, but a Nanotyrannus latheus, its own species. So really, it's a twofer in terms of new dinos. And just a few weeks later, another paper came out adding even more certainty to this new theory. And they did it by going for the throat. These researchers noticed that in birds and in non-avian dinosaurs, the hyoid bone, so the bone that your tongue attaches to and helps control the ligaments and muscles, it starts out very soft in life and gets ossified as the animal matures. So luckily, the specimen had a preserved hyoid, which is really very rare. And the researchers could tell that it was from a mature dinosaur because it was bone. It was ossified. Hey, I was wrong about this for the longest time, and I don't have any issue saying that. I also didn't know any better, but to me it just made more sense for this to be a young T-Rex, because that's all we really knew of Tyrannosaurids in Hell Creek. Sometimes you just need the right amount of context and information to make a better analysis. That's science. That's science, baby. The cool thing about this is that it tells us that the T-Rex ecosystem had multiple predators of different sizes. It was much more ecologically complex than we ever knew. Kind of makes me wonder, at some point, a growing T-Rex would be the same size as Nanotyrannus. Probably a little beefier though. Really, I wonder if they could play. I wonder if they did play. Or who ate who. That's probably play to them too. Staying in the family, but headed all the way over to Mongolia, where a new Tyrannosaurid taught us about the evolution of the coolest animal to ever live. This was Kankulu, which means the Dragon Prince. The fossils had been discovered in 1972 and were thought to belong to Electrosaurus. Clearly an electric-type dinosaur. But new research on them shows that it was a new dinosaur. Kankulu lived about 30 million years before T-Rex first appeared on the scene. At this time, Tyrannosaurids were smaller and nimbler. The Dragon Prince was only about 4 meters long, no big deal, and weighed about 700 kilograms. But its long, thin legs and relatively pointy snout show us what ancestors of T-Rex probably looked like. It also tells us that T-Rex's ancestors were likely Asian dinosaurs that migrated to North America. Speaking of Mongolian, small, old versions of famous dinosaurs, this was also the year we discovered the oldest known pachycephalosaur. I'm just gonna say for a second, I love pachycephalosaurs. I think they're one of the most intriguing and unknown groups of dinosaurs that ever lived. I mean, look at those big domes. They're beautiful. Mwah. And so spiky. They look like little dragons. I love them. And their teeth? What a mystery, really. Okay, anyway, back on track. Its name was Zavacephaly, which basically means OG old head. They lived around 110 million years ago and were about the size of a Canada goose. Aw, imagine Canada geese headbutting each other into submission. Or to impress the goose ladies. Cute. This discovery showed us the early stage of Pachycephalosaurian evolution. That's a big deal. We've known so little about their evolution all this time. They were already headbanging for a long time by the time the massive Pachycephalosaurus showed up. We'll get back to new dinos in a minute, but let's mention some of the coolest discoveries that researchers made about known species. As a secret goth, my favorite is naturally the dino mummies. Yep, you heard right. 66 million years ago, an Edmontosaurus died in a puddle of mud. Then there was a flash flood, and the body got covered in sediment, which created a thin layer of minerals. Even after the flesh rotted away, the clay mask preserved amazing details of the dino. These are the oldest known hooves of any vertebrate, even though it's very likely that some older dinos or animals before dinos might have had them too. Besides what they looked like, we might have also learned how to tell the males and females apart, and the clues are all in the tail. New research by Bartozzo et al. Pointed out that a lot of Edmontosaurus had bones that had been broken and healed. Now these are the neural spines, so the top projection along the spine that creates those tall finger-like sail-looking things that support the muscle in the tail. That's what was getting broken, not the actual vertebrae themselves. So that led to a question. Why was just the top of the back of the tail getting broken? And by the back of the tail, I mean like hip area, right up close to the hips there. What was going on? Any ideas? Turns out that male hadrosaurs weren't just heartbreakers. They might have also been backbreakers. The males, after all, weighed about 3 tons, so a male mounting a female could have done some damage, especially if the female wasn't full grown. I can think of a few animals today where the males far outgrow the females, and sometimes the females' lives are put at risk through the process of mating. I'm thinking elephant seals. Now that's scary. Were they the elephant seals of the Cretaceous? Maybe. The other cool thing about this, though, is the incredible capacity to heal for these dinosaurs. We don't know how often they were mating, not at all, but we know that If there was a high chance of them breaking their backs every time they did it, they would have to heal pretty darn fast to live another day, especially when being chased down by T-Rex, but also Nanotyrannus. Hell Creek was a scary place. Back onto Dino feet, their tracks are important because they tell us a lot about their behavior as dinos. Another one of the coolest discoveries this year was that some dinosaurs moved in mixed herds, kind of like zebras and wildebeest today. The basis for this was trackways found in Dinosaur Provincial Park in Alberta, Canada. The tracks were dated to be around 76 million years old and showed ceratopsians walking alongside ankylosaurids. T-Rex tracks were also found, which suggests that these mixed herds could have been formed for protection. Honestly, that's extremely cool, because you've got all kinds of different forms of weapons. Like, the ankylosaurs are protecting from the back, but then you can have a whole phalanx formation of these horned dinosaurs around the front and sides. Yeah, that's how I would arrange them. The small caveat is that we can't know for sure if the tracks were made at the same time or within hours or even days of each other. But at the very least, they give us amazing clues of how these dinosaurs interacted with each other. Now I want to see dinosaurs doing like Banjo-Kazooie. Can we find proof of Banjo-Kazooie dinosaurs? That'd be really cool. In terms of sheer numbers, the biggest discovery of the year was probably the finding of over 20,000 dinosaur tracks in the Italian Alps. The tracks are now in steep parts of the mountain, an awesome reminder of the shifting nature of the Earth. But when they were made, they were on tidal flatlands, and large groups of prosauropods walked along them. This happened during the Triassic, about 200 million years ago, and all we have to do to see them is climb a steep rocky mountain in the Italian Alps. See you there? Now let's do a rapid-fire round of new species and what we know about them. Duonicus was a therizanasaurid, but instead of the iconic 3 claws, it only had 2. It gave us extra evidence that this was one of the weirdest groups to ever live. Chatty Titan, obviously the chattest of titans, was a member of the South American giants, the Titanosaurids. This was kind of the runt of the family, at just about 7 meters. Or roughly the size of a giraffe. Aw, a dinosaur teen titan. Then we have Spicomelis. Like, what are we even looking at here? They were short, spiky, and had a flat back, but they were like walking iron maidens. It is the oldest known ankylosaurid and lived roughly 168 million years ago in Africa. It had spines on its sides, giant spines on its neck, spines on its tail, and even spines on its spine. The ribs themselves had spines, making it the only known animal ever to have these features. What were they so afraid of? Oh yeah, theropods. Kicking it a little bit more old school, we have the Huayra cursor jaguensis. These dinos lived at the beginning of the dino era, over 220 million years ago. At first glance, you'd think that they're just your regular bipedal herbivore, but amazingly, they belonged to the group that would eventually evolve into sauropods. You can kind of see the long neck here starting to hint at that lifestyle. One of their descendants would be Astignosaurus genuflexa, a newly discovered South American giant. Their knees bent forwards, and it used its powerful muscles to actively move and stand around. It wasn't like a horse that could just lock its knees. This was a new discovery for giant sauropods, which had been assumed to have stiff knees to support their weight. But nope. Some of them were much more flexible than we ever thought, and could take a knee if they wanted.
Dinos ruled the Earth for over 150 million years. But after the asteroid and out of their ashes, the mammals took over. How did we pull that one off?
After all, we weren't the only survivors. Reptiles, insects, arachnids, amphibians, fish, and even some dinos survived. They were the ancestors of all the animals alive today.
So what made us special? And could we ever lose that crown? To answer those and many other questions, I chatted with my friend Steve Russati. He's the scientist who literally wrote the book on the rise and reign of mammals.
I'm Steve Brusati. I am a paleontologist, and I study dinosaurs, I study mammals, I study birds, and I am a professor at the University of Edinburgh in Scotland, and I love to communicate science and especially to write books about fossils.
But let's start from the beginning. Mammals didn't arise out of thin air after the non-avian dinosaurs died out. Our lineage goes way back. And there was a time before the time of dinos when our ancestors and relatives were the biggest and meanest dudes on the planet. These were the early synapsids, legendary animals like the Dimetrodon, which is a classic toy people mistakenly got in a dinosaur action figure bag. But it's actually more closely related to rats and whales than to Stegosaurus. Cotylarhynchus, which was an early terrestrial herbivore, but with a super tiny head, which likely made them a little bit slow. And the saber-toothed Gorgonopsids, the apex predators of the Permian. When our relatives, the synapsids, were at their peak, then came the Great Dying, also known as the Permian extinction event, when up to 90% of all animal species disappeared. This created a sort of power vacuum that dinosaurs quickly filled as they grew larger and took over the world. But they weren't alone. Somewhere in the shadows, scurrying around their legs, our ancestors were alive and well. They just looked a lot less impressive than the terrible lizards we know and love. Cretaceous mammals looked mostly like the type of creature that you'd find hiding in a burrow, or inside the belly of an owl. But why don't we know anything about them? We asked Steve to help us understand why we know so little about our mammalian ancestors.
The dinosaurs, I think, have a better PR agent than a lot of these fossil mammals. I think in large part, the dinosaurs, T-Rex, Triceratops, they were just so sublime and so spectacular, and we're so familiar with them. They're such iconic animals because they're big, because they're brash, and they get the headlines. And then they suddenly went extinct, most of them at least, and then mammals basically took their place. Mammals became the top predators and top plant eaters and most diverse animals on land in many ecosystems. But those fossil mammals are not household names. And hopefully through some of the books, I've written other things that maybe I'm trying to give them a bit more publicity. But I think when it comes down to it, the last dinosaurs like T-Rex and Triceratops, they were huge. They were iconic animals. The mammals that survived the asteroid were small. They were little mouse-sized, rat-sized things. And then they had to build a new world out of that. So they're probably not the kind of fossils that are going to grab people's attention right away.
Yeah, it gives me chills just thinking about it, really. But back then, we didn't have that same level of diversity in terms of body forms and niches and whatnot. And they were all, as you said, they were small generalists. So in your book, you mentioned that dinosaurs didn't get very small and that mammals didn't get very big. There's almost like a line that they couldn't cross. Why was that line there? Why was there this weird discrepancy between them? Was there some kind of optimization happening, or?
It's a great question. And I don't know if there's some greater, metaphysical reason, if there was some constraint on dinosaur size or mammal size, or whether it just came down to the contingencies of evolution, of how things have just unfolded on Earth over time through luck and through chance and through species adapting to their own environments, and that adding up over time into these grand evolutionary stories. I think what happened with dinosaurs and mammals, to take a step back, is we have this idea that the dinosaurs had their day and then they died, and then the mammals took over, and now the mammals have their day, and we're in the age of mammals, and we're a mammal. And that story is generally true. There we go. There are the mammals that truly rule the world. So in a way, that story is, it is generally true. The dinosaurs were the dominant land animals for a very long time in terms of the diversity of dinosaurs, the different groups, their different diets, and sizes, and behaviors. They were the top predators, the top plant eaters, and in many food chains, and filled many niches. And that persisted for about 150 million years. Now it's mammals that hold those keystone niches in many ecosystems on land, and it's mammals that are the biggest land animals, and it's mammals that are the top predators and biggest plant eaters in most ecosystems. That's true. But what's not true is that the dinosaurs died and then the mammals evolved to take their place. Dinosaurs died, except for birds, and this is the best time, of course. I got to do it. I'm sorry to plug the next book.
Yes, of course.
We can talk about this. Comes out in April in Canada and the U.S. and in June here. We can talk about birds. But
that's so exciting.
Dinosaurs did survive the asteroid as birds. All the other ones died, but mammals survived the asteroid.
Let's take a look at the mammals from the Cretaceous and the features that helped them thrive and survive.
Most of these mammals were smaller than a rat. Their tiny, flexible bodies helped them hide in holes and under vegetation. They had a great sense of smell to find food and mates and to detect predators. They were likely nocturnal and ate anything they could find, from small invertebrates to roots and seeds. But they also lived in moist forests that broke down bones quickly, which means that we don't have a lot of fossils of these species. So we have a pretty good general idea of what they looked like and how they behaved, but we don't have a complete picture of all the species that lived alongside T-Rex and other dinos.
Yeah, I think so. We have to be very humble in the face of the fossil record because we know the fossil record is biased, and we know that, generally speaking, it's easier to preserve something big as a fossil. Maybe not a whole skeleton, but a vertebra, a limb bone of something the size of T-Rex. It's just going to withstand the rigors of time.
Can you tell me why?
Simply because of the size, really. Because something, you think of a T-Rex, the size of a bus. Its thigh bone is basically my size. Something like that is just much more robust, much more sturdy. It's going to be much easier to bury that in sand or mud and have it turn into a fossil and then withstand tens of millions of years of erosion and the earth moving around and everything than, say, a little mouse or a little sparrow or something like that. That's just the general fact of the fossil record. However, there are these places, these spectacular sites where entire ecosystems get buried all at once, oftentimes because it's a volcano that erupts and buries them in ash, or there's some kind of flash flood or something. And in those cases, we can get very small animals preserved. And a lot of these famous feathered dinosaurs from China are a great example. That's why the feathers are preserved. They're locked in stone because they were buried so quickly by these volcanoes. But alongside those feathered dinosaurs are a lot of the best skeletons of mammals from the age of dinosaurs. And you have little mammals, of mice and shrews that are found alongside those feathered dinosaurs. And I think what those ecosystems tell us is that there would have been overlap between mammals and dinosaurs. It's not that all mammals were tiny and all dinosaurs were big. There was an area where a middle ground where they would have overlapped, and there were plenty of dinosaurs, a lot of these raptor dinosaurs, for instance, that were the size of pigeons, of crows. But what we don't have are any mammals that are bigger than a house cat living with dinosaurs during the Triassic, Jurassic, or Cretaceous. And we don't have any dinosaurs that are really much smaller than, say, like a pigeon or something like that. We don't have any dinosaurs that are the size of a shrew. And I think we would know that by now. We would have some fossils, we would have some teeth. We would, in these ecosystems where we find the tiny mammals as fossils, we'd be finding the tiny dinosaurs. So there is an overlap, but I do think generally, we know Mesozoic mammals never got anywhere near as big as the biggest Mesozoic dinosaurs. And we know that Mesozoic dinosaurs never got anywhere near as small as these tiny little shrew-sized mammals. So there is something to it that was more or less the equilibrium for many tens of millions of years.
Then came the asteroid. In a few hours, the world changed forever. An asteroid larger than Mount Everest crashed into the coast of Mexico at about 20 kilometers per second. The explosion was billions of times the power of the Hiroshima atomic bomb. Those within 10 kilometers were immediately pulverized. Then, a massive heat wave set the world on fire. Pulverized rock got kicked up into the atmosphere and then returned to the Earth in the shape of molten glass. It doesn't seem like it would have been survivable, but somehow our ancestors persevered. Life, finds a way. But what did their future hold for them?
Another thing I'd love to touch on, what was the world like after the asteroid? And what did animals eat? And like, why couldn't small dinosaurs eat whatever mammals were eating?
Boy, this is one of these questions that we can let our imaginations run wild a little bit because, of course, we don't have a huge amount of direct evidence of those first ecosystems living right after the asteroid hit, but we do have evidence in the geological record of the wildfires that would have engulfed the world. We have the charcoal and the burnt wood that they left behind. We have evidence of the tidal waves, the huge tsunamis that tore through the Gulf of Mexico and the Atlantic. That's where the asteroid hit. We have rock layers where there are these tsunami deposits with boulders the size of houses ripped up by these waves. In the rocks, we have these glass bullets that would have fallen from the sky. When the asteroid hit, it would have liquidated all of this stuff. It would have gone up into the atmosphere and then fallen back down. And as it fell, this stuff was really hot. It would have cooled as it fell, eventually forming glass, but that would have superheated the atmosphere, hotter than an oven. And so these are things we have direct evidence for.
Right.
And so we know that these things were happening immediately after the asteroid. So it would have been apocalyptic. The big thing was that you had the wildfires, the tsunamis, the earthquakes, all that hot glass raining down from the sky. That would have happened in the minutes, the hours, the days, maybe the weeks after the asteroid. But the true killer, and that's not to say those things didn't kill, they would have killed a lot of animals.
No kidding.
But the true killer was what happened in the months and years after, because all of that dust and dirt and grime from the collision of the asteroid, all of the soot from the wildfires, the smoke, went up into the atmosphere, and it would have covered the earth in darkness. It would have plunged the earth, these thick clouds of dust and dirt and grime and smoke. And maybe it just lasted for a few years, maybe it lasted for a few decades. It's hard to tell for sure from the rock record. But it would have been essentially a global nuclear winter. And the earth went dark and cold, and there wasn't sunlight. Plants could not photosynthesize.
Right. You can imagine they would be the first to go.
And the plankton in the oceans at the base of the food web could not photosynthesize, and they died. And that's why the food chains really collapsed on land and in the water. Now, plants came back eventually because seeds can last a long time in the soil. But there would have been at least a few years, and maybe up to a few hundred years, or maybe even a few thousand years, hard to know for sure, where there were no big land plants, there were no forests. And so that is at the root of why so many species died, because you have this collapse of ecosystems on land. And the best way to survive is if you were not part of those ecosystems that relied on plants for food. So let's say you were a part of an ecosystem that used detritus at the base of the food chain. So basically organic gunk, decaying stuff. There's plenty of food webs today where the base of the food web is not photosynthesizing animals or plants, but detritus.
Okay.
And that would have been a great time if you were in a detritus food chain, because there would have been all this dying stuff, and that could have lasted you a few years until at least some of the plants started to grow again. And indeed, the 25% of species that survive when the asteroid hit are things like crocodiles and turtles and a lot of these freshwater fishes that were parts of these detritus-based food webs in rivers, in lakes, and in ponds. So that was one of the keys to survival. In addition to being small, growing fast, reproducing fast, just having a fast-paced life so you could get through it. And ultimately, that's probably why most dinosaurs died. Most dinosaurs were pretty big. No, they weren't all the size of T-Rex, but even if you were just the size of, let's say, a golden retriever or a person, it would take you at least a few years to grow from a baby into an adult. That's a real problem if the whole world is plunged in darkness. You would need food.
Yeah, your needs would be that much bigger. You would need that much more nutrients for that growing body.
And time, the time it would take. You'd have to navigate a few years from going from a baby to an adult, and then you'd have to reproduce at the end of that. And you can just see how the odds of survival of both an individual and their species would be really harsh for these bigger animals. But if you were small, if you grew fast, if you reproduced fast, if you could eat lots of different stuff, you could be flexible, but especially if you could eat this detritus, this dead decaying stuff.
Had stomachs of steel.
Exactly. And that's the ticket to survival. And I think that, I like to think of it as it's like the mass extinction, the asteroid plunges the Earth into this crazy casino. It's now just a game of chance. And you're sitting at the poker table and you got to play that game with whatever hand of cards you've been dealt. There's not enough time to change, to adapt through the normal processes of natural selection. Of individuals being fit to their environment over the generations. You have to confront the asteroid and this nuclear winter with whatever cards you're holding. If you are small, that's good. If you're big, that's not good. And so really the rules of the game change during these mass extinctions, and species have to get through. They have to endure. That's the key to survival. Then once the world starts to heal and things settle down, then kind of the normal background rules of evolution come back into play. But survival is the key.
So yeah, the key for our ancestors was to be super adaptable, eat lots of different things, grow fast, mate young, parental care, and probably die fast. These were short lives, but as long as they managed to have babies before they died, their lineages were guaranteed to survive at least one more generation. This was true for other groups too, of course. Small birds, freshwater amphibians and reptiles, small lizards, they all survived the dark years thanks to their ability to hide, to eat anything, and to mate quickly. One of the key foods that helped all these poor, grimy animals survive was seeds. They're nutritious and last a long time before going bad. So even when nothing was growing, old seeds could sustain animals for a while.
Absolutely. So I should say I do tell that story in the story of birds.
Oh.
It's actually a whole chapter.
Spoilers.
The book covers the origin of birds from dinosaurs and how feathers evolved and wings and how these dinosaurs took to the skies and became birds. And then it follows the evolution of birds over the 150 million years of time from their origin to today. And the end Cretaceous extinction is a big part of it. There's a whole chapter basically on why birds were the only dinosaurs to survive the asteroid. And I think it's a similar thing. It comes down to the hand of cards they were holding. What we have to be aware of is that there were lots of dinosaurs that had feathers and wings that died out. There were lots of birds that died out too. There was an enormous diversity of birds living with T-Rex and Triceratops. Most of those birds died, maybe even 90% or more died. Only a few birds survived. And the birds that died were the more, what we would now recognize as the more primitive ones, the ones with teeth and big claws and long tails. There were a bunch of birds like that living up till the moment the asteroid hit. The ones that survived were the modern style birds, the ones that have beaks instead of teeth, the ones that have short tails and a fan of feathers at the end of their tails for aerodynamic purposes, that have bigger wings, bigger chest muscles to power those wings, that grew really fast, that grew from a baby into an adult within a year or less.
This sounds like the key.
Exactly. So you can kind of see where I'm going, the hand of cards that these particular birds had. Now, of course, we're looking at this from the vantage point of our current time. We know what lived and what died, and maybe we're judging this after the fact, but the fact is that a bunch of birds died. Every non-bird dinosaur died. The only ones that survived was this very small group of fast-growing, warm-blooded, beaked birds that could eat seeds with those beaks. That's a big argument that people have made, and I think there's a lot of truth to it. If you could eat seeds, that would be your ticket to surviving. You could at least nourish yourself and maintain yourself during those months and years when the nuclear winter was happening. It would just be a way through.
These early mammals are some of the most interesting animals to research right now. And the many ways scientists are figuring out how those long-gone mammals lived is almost miraculous.
Yeah, well, this is something we're trying to understand. And so my research group here at the University of Edinburgh, we've been studying a lot about the extinction and about the mammals that survived and how placental mammals then took over the world. And, we've been using a lot of different techniques to study these surviving mammals and these pioneering mammals in the Paleocene, the interval after the asteroid. And one of the things we've been doing is trying to understand how they grew and how they reproduced. So this is a lot of work that Greg Funston, who is a great Canadian scientist who many of you guys out there know. Greg was a postdoc here, and we did this project. Greg published this in Nature in 2022, a fantastic paper he did as a young scientist, where we were looking at the histology, thin sections of teeth and of bones, counting the growth rings in the bones, but teeth have daily lines of growth when a mammal tooth is forming, including our own teeth. And we also did chemical sampling. There's certain elements that we know in modern mammals change as a mammal grows. And in particular, zinc and barium, they change a lot, and they especially change during two key moments in a mammal's life. The first is birth, and then the second is when a mammal's weaning. So maybe not so much a moment, but that period of time where they're getting away from drinking their mother's milk, starting to eat other food.
Okay.
So Greg was able to look at these chemical signals in teeth of a bunch of mammals that were living soon after the asteroid hit. And what he was able to tell in this project that he led, that he did here in Edinburgh, was that some of these Paleocene mammals living right after the asteroid, they were growing like modern day placentas. They were giving birth to babies that gestated in their mother's wombs for 7 months. And those babies were born at pretty big size, many, many kilos, not little pipsqueaks, but hefty babies. And then they drank their mother's milk for about 1 month, and then they weaned and they started eating their own food. And within a year or so, they were reproducing themselves.
That's fast. Okay.
First of all, it's remarkable that those signals, these chemical signals, are still in the teeth of these mammals that are more than 60 million years old. It's amazing. We were shocked when we got those results, and we checked them and double checked them. And really that novelty of finding these chemical signals in teeth that are so old, that's one of the main reasons why this got into Nature. But the important thing really is that what we think is that giving birth to babies that can grow in the relative safety of the womb for a long time, that means they can be born at a more advanced state. They can be bigger, they can be more developed, and they have a leg up already from when they're born. So when it comes to surviving the extinction, we don't really know yet if Mesozoic mammals, living with T-Rex and Triceratops were growing like that or not. We do know, though, is that some of the first mammals living afterwards were. So whether being able to give live birth to big babies helped mammals survive the asteroid, hard to say, but definitely it was part of the reason why they were able to thrive so well afterwards, and we think why they were able to get so big.
So how long did dinos live after the asteroid?
And there's a whole host of fossil birds. We didn't even get into some of these absolutely jaw-dropping, crazy, weird birds that lived after the asteroid. So birds made it through, some birds, all the other dinosaurs died. We think of mammals taking over from the dinosaurs. They did, but birds, they really gave mammals a run for their money. They still do, but there's a lot of extinct birds that basically were born-again dinosaurs. There were terror birds that stood, like 8 feet tall and had these big, sharp, nasty, pointed beaks, big claws on their feet that were the top predators in South America for millions of years. They were basically like a small version of a T-Rex, but not even that small. These were, imagine a bird that's like 8 foot tall with this enormous sharp beak.
Still technically dinosaurs.
When you look at one of these things, you can see it. This is a top predator dinosaur born again after the asteroid. There were giant plant-eating birds, moas of New Zealand. These things stood 10 feet tall, and they lived until a few hundred years ago. It was humans that killed off the moas on New Zealand. New Zealand was the last dinosaur-dominated ecosystem in the world. Mammals barely got there, just a few bats.
Right.
It was birds that held on. Birds that became supersized. The moas were the big plant eaters at the base of the food chain, filling the Triceratops niches. You had these Haas eagles, the biggest eagles of all time. They were like the T-Rex equivalent at the top of the food chain. It was a dinosaur-dominated world, the last outpost of the dinosaur empire, persisting until only 700 or 800 years ago, until the first humans got to New Zealand.
Of course, we had to step in and ruin everything.
Yeah. And that to me is wild. It would be like finding some area of the world today, some island somewhere where there's people in togas who are swearing fealty to Caesar and cheering on lions and gladiators.
So my final question is pertaining to the animals that we've got here today and the survivors and like the patterns in which, our mammals today have evolved. So in a really dark scenario, if another asteroid were to hit the Earth, or some other catastrophic event were to take over the Earth, do you think that mammals would win again? Do you think that our mammals today would find a way to thrive and survive? Or at least some of us?
Part of it, I think we have to be honest, is that it's a bit unpredictable. It's hard to know from the start. Chance and circumstance play a role when everything changes so quickly. And it's like you're playing a game of poker. You got your hand of cards, but there's a bit of randomness in what cards you have and who you're competing with and so on. So I think we wouldn't know for sure, and that's part of the game. Ultimately, I would think it would be those species that are small, that grow fast, that can eat a lot of different foods, that can hide away easy. So things like mice and rats and pigeons and a lot of these animals that we know in our world today are just really adaptable, that can thrive in the darkness, in the filth, in the chaos. That I would place my money on them, and I would also place my money on us. I think, would 8 billion humans get through an event like that? No, but I think we would have the ingenuity and the adaptability to find a way to make it through. But I hope it never comes to that. I hope this hypothesis is never tested in the real world.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Steve. And this is just the tip of the iceberg. Steve's books are full of amazing facts and stories of some of the most incredible animals to ever live. If you enjoyed this chat, check them out.
So we have The Rise and Fall of the Dinosaurs, which tells the story of dinosaur evolution and also my own story of studying dinosaurs and how I became a paleontologist. Then I did The Rise and Reign of the Mammals, and that's the story of mammals from their humble origins alongside the dinosaurs to the modern day. And now the next one again will be the story of birds. This is the UK cover. The US and Canada won't be a bit different, but this will be out soon, all about bird origins and evolution. These are pop science books. They're meant for the public. They're not academic books. I'd really try to write them in a way that can reach people broadly. And they're the kind of books I hope that when I got into the field, when I really became obsessed with fossils, is when I was a teenager, and it was through reading books by Stephen Jay Gould and Bob Bacher and Mike Benton and Peter Ward and a lot of these great pop science books that really got me into it. So I try to write these books to hopefully be able to communicate with the 15-year-old version of me. Ultimately, that's what I'm channeling.
Well, you're doing it.
Well, thank you.
Making a difference.
Mammals. From giant lizard-like weirdos to tiny dino snacks to the largest animal to ever live. We have come a long way. All of our audience and most of the staff at Animalogic are mammals. And we're so glad our ancestors survived the dinos.
Up to 10,000 animal species go extinct every year. Some of them are small animals from isolated islands, but some others are animals that were common and widespread just a generation ago. What's leading those to disappear? What have we lost over the past few years? And what can we do to help? This is a history of extinction, a story that's ongoing and whose plot thickens every day. Did you know that since the start of this episode, a species has gone extinct? I'm not trying to be a downer here, but wildlife all around us is disappearing at an unprecedented rate. Animals that used to be abundant are now gone forever.
In 2024, up to 10,000 species went extinct. The most shocking of them was the slender-billed curlew. The name might not mean much to you, but if you look at it, you'll recognize it as a bird that used to be in the background of swamp scenes across Europe, and occasionally in places as remote as Canada, Japan, and the Arabian Peninsula. Their population started crashing in the early 20th century, in part due to the fact that their nesting grounds in Central Europe were converted into farms. The last confirmed sighting was in Morocco in the 90s, and in 2024, it was confirmed extinct. This was a bird that used to be abundant just 100 years ago, and had a gigantic range, and now we'll never get to see it. There were also lots of regional species that said their last goodbyes in 2024. Lake Vistanita used to be the only home of the Thracian shad. The habitat of this banana-sized fish got polluted by industrial runoff and sewage. And it got saltier after the construction of a canal to the Mediterranean Sea. Eventually, their habitat became unsuitable for them, and the whole species got wiped out. Similarly, the Kim whitefish, a fish endemic to the Chiemsee Lake in Germany, disappeared completely due to an influx of invasive species and wastewater into the lake. In the islands of the Pacific, invertebrates such as the Captain's Cook bean snail and the Langford's tree snail went extinct due to predation by invasive species. Among mammals, 2024 was the last year for the Australian Capricorn rabbit rat. Its population was decimated by invasive cats, and their food sources were slashed to make room for farms. These are just examples from the last 6 months of 2024. If we expand our look back a little bit further, you realize quite quickly that it's just the tip of the iceberg. Remember these guys? They're the protagonists of 2011's animated masterpiece, Rio. These are Spix's macaws, and since 2019, they've been considered extinct in the wild. The main threat, as with many other South American species, is deforestation. The introduction of grazing animals like cows and sheep also prevent forests from regrowing naturally. There are some individuals in captivity, and sometimes they escape or get let loose. This leads to occasional sightings, but most importantly, there's a reintroduction program based on breeding them in captivity and releasing them in new protected areas. So there's still a sliver of hope that they can come back, but even this small possibility is more than many species have. Spix's macaws are very hard to breed in captivity because of their complex social structures and small genetic pool. But for most animals, this isn't even an option. Yangtze river dolphins are one of those unfortunate species. These dolphins, also known as baigees, were an ancient species that appeared around 20 million years ago and evolved separately from oceanic dolphins. As China industrialized, Yangtze River got polluted and overcrowded with boats. Some of those boats were fishing boats, which overfished the dolphins' prey. By the time researchers realized how precarious the situation was, it was too late. Baigees didn't do well in captivity and were never successfully bred at research centers. In 2006, they were declared functionally extinct, making them the first cetacean species to go extinct due to human activities. The ecological crisis that destroyed their populations continues and threatens other species. The Chinese paddlefish was declared extinct in 2020, and the Yangtze finless porpoise and the Yangtze giant softshell turtle are critically endangered. Water pollution can quickly destroy marine and river ecosystems, but overfishing and poaching can be an even greater threat. This is exactly what happened to the western black rhino. This black rhino once roamed the savannas across Central and West Africa. It was smaller than other black rhino species, weighing in at just around a ton. Some people, the dummies that we can be, thought its horn made of bone and keratin had medicinal powers. Some people also used it to make fancy dagger handles. These rhinos were poached for their horns until eventually none of them remained. The last confirmed site was in 2006, and in 2011 it was declared extinct. Other black rhinos, like the Javan, Sumatran, and eastern black rhinos, are currently critically endangered, with poaching and habitat destruction being their main threats.
Island species are the ones most easily disturbed. You just need one invasive species to settle in, or human populations to grow quickly and disturb their habitats, and a whole species can be wiped out in a few years.
The Pinta Island tortoise of Galapagos went extinct after the last member of the species died in 2012. This was the famous Lonesome George, a bit of a celebrity in the conservation world. The turtle had been thought to go extinct in the first half of the 20th century, until George was discovered in 1971. The hope was that since George was found in the wild, there could still be other Pinta Island tortoises. And if they were found, they could mate with Georgie Boy.
But after 40 years of searching, none were found.
In 2011, when George was thought to be turning 100 years old, the plan changed to make him mate with turtles from the closest living species, the wolf volcano giant turtle. The moms not only had one of the coolest subspecies names I've ever heard, but they could, in theory, mate with George to make hybrids. The babies wouldn't be pure Pinta Island turtles, but they would retain enough features that would help them survive on the island. George was housed with 2 females, and he mated with them, of course. The females laid eggs, but none of them hatched. A year later, George died, and his subspecies disappeared with his last breath.
There are plans to repopulate the island with other genetically close turtles from other areas. Over time, they would adapt to the island and become Pinta Island Turtles version 2.0. But whether that's the same species or not is highly debatable.
In Hawaii, the po'uli, a honey creeper bird, went extinct in 2004 due to habitat destruction and avian malaria, a disease which was brought into the island by European boats in the 19th century. The archipelago had previously seen the extinction of other bird species for the same reasons. Some of the most well-studied species to disappear were Achioloa stinegeri, Hemignathus hanapepe, Moho bricatus, and Myodestes myodestinus, all natives to the island of Kauai, as well as Loxops ocraceus and Hemignathus affinis from Maui.
So yeah, humans. Sure, we've done some incredible stuff, but let's be real, we've also made plenty of questionable decisions. And this didn't start recently. Our ancestors brought waves of ecological devastation wherever they went. Although to be fair to them, in their time, they had to do it to survive.
Humans have been wiping out species since our ancestors first left Africa. But after the last ice age 12,000 years ago, the pace of extinctions accelerated. As we spread across the globe, we didn't just hunt, we reshaped entire ecosystems.
Many species that had survived for millennia suddenly found themselves facing a relentless new predator. And since then, we kind of never stopped.
Overhunting wiped out incredible creatures, like the mighty mastodon and the woolly mammoth, 2 of the last Ice Age giants. These massive, hairy, elephant-like animals roamed most of North America and Eurasia up to about 10,000 to 11,000 years ago.
After reaching North America, people hunted them with stone tools. Some sites even show entire groups of mastodons taken down and processed for food. With climate change and habitat loss also in the mix, these mastodons became ancient history. But here's a question. If mastodons and mammoths didn't make it, why do elephants still exist?
It comes down to location and adaptability. Mastodons were stuck in North America, while elephants thrived in Africa and Asia, places where humans weren't wiping them out as quickly. Mastodons also had a pickier diet tied to vegetation that was disappearing as the climate warmed. Other megafauna had their own problems, but humans were the common denominator. Elephants survived in part because Africa and Asia weren't hit as hard by the end of the Ice Age as North America and Europe. Their habitats remained relatively stable, and this gave them a better shot at long-term survival.
Additionally, being African animals, elephants evolved alongside early humans and likely learned to be cautious, which made them harder to hunt. And in some regions, tropical diseases helped keep human populations lower, reducing the overall hunting pressure. So while their Ice Age cousins disappeared, elephants held on.
Many species were hunted to extinction for food, like ground sloths, giant bison, giant elk, diprotodons, procoptodons, and Geniornis went extinct through our ancestors' bellies. They're natural predators, like saber-toothed cats, American lions, American cheetahs, direwolves, cave bears, short-faced bears, giant hyenas, and marsupial lions starved to extinction after their prey disappeared.
Roughly 200 large mammal species went extinct in this era. Many of them were large animals, over 50 kilograms. The world was changed forever, and the era of the mammalian megafauna was over. The Anthropocene, the age of humans, was starting. It had an abundance of food, comforts, and quality of life for people, but the ecosystems and biodiversity would never be the same.
After the Great Pleistocene die-off, there was a period of relative calm, until the age of exploration. As humans pushed into new frontiers, we weren't just walking anymore. We were sailing, exploring, and bringing destruction with us.
As European ships set out to chart the globe, they brought with them not only weapons, but disease, livestock, and stowaway species that disrupted entire ecosystems, wiping out creatures that had never seen a predator before.
Animals on large, connected landmasses like Africa, Europe, and Asia had a fighting chance. They could migrate, escape, and had long histories of co-evolving with predators. But island species were sitting ducks. Isolated for thousands of years with no natural predators, many had lost their defenses entirely. The dodo, for example, lived only on the island of Mauritius in the Indian Ocean. It had no instinct to flee from humans, or the invasive species humans brought with them. First spotted by sailors in 1598, gone by 1662. Less than 70 years to go from thriving to extinct. All thanks to hungry settlers and their invasive species that followed in their wake.
Now, let me paint you a picture of island life if you were a dodo before humans showed up. A predator-free paradise with about 800 kilometers of ocean between you and the closest large predator. No mammals means no worries. Without the fear of predators, you evolved to become flightless ground dwellers, basically in a permanent state of livin' la vida loca.
Until 1598 anyway, when the Dutch took possession of the island, bringing with them not only their livestock of sheep, goats, and pigs, but also their personal pets, macaque monkeys, and of course, the ever-present stowaway rats. All of these animals competed with the dodo for resources. They ate eggs and chicks, grazed on the same fields and forest beds where the dodos lived, and reproduced explosively. All of this, combined with the fact that the dodos were likely an easy food source for the Dutch settlers, led to their complete extinction in 1662, barely 6 decades after the Dutch first arrived.
Flightless birds couldn't simply fly away. They had no real defense against hungry humans.
For example, the moa, New Zealand's feathered giant. Some species stood 12 feet tall and weighed over 200 kilos. A bird so big, it wouldn't just look you in the eye, it would look down at you. And just like the dodo and the great auk, it had no natural fear of humans, which made it an easy target. The Maori arrived in the 13th century and hunted them relentlessly. Within a couple of hundred years, every moa was gone.
And they didn't go alone. The Haast's eagle, the heaviest eagle ever recorded, and the moa's top predator, vanished too. A stark reminder that extinction doesn't happen in isolation. It unravels entire ecosystems. And nowhere is that unraveling more rapid and catastrophic than on islands like New Zealand.
The New Zealand owlet nightjar, a small ground-roosting bird, went extinct in the 13th century. Its strong legs and reduced wings suggest it was either flightless or had limited flight capability. Not much is known about these little spooky birds, because they likely disappeared shortly after the arrival of Polynesians. Its eggs and young were picked off by the introduced rats. It was a quick demise for this bird, leaving behind only bones and questions. Its neighbor, the finch's duck, was another mostly flightless bird that foraged through forests and wetlands of New Zealand. It was twice as big as its closest living relative, the Australian maned duck. But like the owlet nightjar, it couldn't survive a sudden wave of hunting and the arrival of predators like rats and dogs. It likely went extinct around the same time as the owlet nightjar. If you see a pattern with large, mostly flightless birds, you would be correct. This is the New Zealand swan, bigger and heavier than its living Australian relatives and about twice the size of a Canadian danger goose. It was on an evolutionary path towards flightlessness. Its bones have been found in food dumps dating to between 1050 and 1400 CE, suggesting it was hunted heavily and disappeared within just a few centuries of human arrival. And lastly, the adzabil, a giant bird with a huge chisel-like beak, built more like a battering ram than a bird. It stood over a meter tall and weighed around 20 kilos. With no natural predators, it had no reason to fear. But once humans arrived, it was hunted quickly and wiped out by the 16th century, if not sooner.
All of these birds were endemic to the New Zealand archipelago. Most were flightless or had limited mobility, evolving in a world without land predators. But isolation in a time of global interconnectedness is a recipe for disaster.
Other island species that faced extinction quickly after humans arrived were Falkland Islands wolves, killed to protect livestock. The Reunion ibis, devastated by rats and other invasive species. The Mascarene parrot, mostly killed for sport by Europeans. The saddlebacked Rodriguez giant tortoise, eaten by humans as adults while rats and pigs feasted on their nests. And the Mauritius shelled goose, a neighbor of the dodo and a similar species although not genetically closely related, who suffered the same fate as its funny-looking friend.
History is full of species we pushed off the map faster than you can say, "Hey, we'll never make that mistake again." Oh wait, never mind. Outside of island species, sea animals were another casualty of the age of exploration. Sailors found in them a valuable source of food during their long voyages, but often they were too enthusiastic in their hunts.
The Steller's sea cow, for example, was first recorded in 1741. It was a 10-ton, 9-meter-long manatee. Slow, gentle, and unfortunately for them, delicious. These giants were found in the shallow waters of the North Pacific, particularly around the Bering Strait. Their limited range placed them directly in the path of Russian fur traders, making them an accessible and convenient food source. Within 30 years of their discovery by Europeans, they were gone. In the Atlantic, the great auks were once kings. They were the northern equivalent of the penguin. These flightless seabirds were fantastic swimmers, but pretty awkward on land, which unfortunately for them is where humans hunted them while they were nesting. They were wiped out for their feathers and meat, and in 1844, the last known pair was squashed out of existence in Iceland. The only thing that remains there is a memorial to the last known great auk. Their nesting grounds continue to be used by their closest living relatives, the razorbills. These little auks are mini versions of their late cousins. They're half as tall, but only an eighth of their weight. Great auks were hefty.
These overhunting dynamics continued for centuries, and in some cases, they continue today. A 20th century example is the Tasmanian tiger, the marsupial predator that looked like a wolf, hunted like a big cat, and carried its babies in a pouch. This marsupial predator, a cousin of the Tasmanian devil and also known as the thylacine, could open its jaws a full 80 degrees, and when alarmed, it was said to be able to stand upright and even hop like a kangaroo. Unfortunately, European settlers weren't amused or charmed. They saw them as a threat to their livestock, and bounties were set up to cull them. The last confirmed Tasmanian tiger died in captivity in 1936. The real tragedy is that despite its fearsome reputation, studies suggest its jaw was too weak to kill sheep, meaning its status as a livestock menace was likely overblown. When the last individual died, it was the news of a death foretold, and the last chance to protect the largest marsupial predator in the world. Or did it? People still report unconfirmed sightings to this day. Grainy photos, blurry footage, eyewitness accounts. Maybe it's wishful thinking, or maybe something's out there. Wouldn't be the first time we thought a species was gone, and then be rediscovered alive and well. They're called Lazarus species, a term borrowed from the biblical story of Lazarus, who was raised from the dead. In ecology, it refers to creatures that were thought to be extinct, only to make a surprise reappearance.
The OG Lazarus species was the coelacanth, a fish thought to have gone extinct around the same time as the T-Rex, way before we could get our grubby hands on them. In 1938, humans laid eyes on the coelacanth for the first time, when it was caught by accident by a fishing boat. Since then, there's only been a couple hundred of them caught and studied, all of them as bycatch. But we have learned that they're a slow-moving, deep-water species, with possibly the longest gestation period among vertebrates at around 5 years. They swim in a strange way, kinda like doggy paddling or the way animals move on land. And their fins are thought to be a precursor of the types of fins the first fish to take to land had.
A really incredible discovery that's still teaching us about fish biology. Who knows what other ancient species might be hiding at the bottom of the ocean?
Since then, other species have been rediscovered. The Santa Marta saberwing, an elusive hummingbird native to Colombia's Sierra Nevada de Santa Marta Mountains, was feared extinct after no confirmed sighting since 2010. In July 2022, local birdwatcher Jürgen Vega unexpectedly spotted the iridescent emerald green and blue male during a research expedition, marking only the second documented sighting since 1946. In Galapagos, we have another Lonesome George situation with another species previously thought to be extinct. Her name is Fernanda, the Fernandina Island giant tortoise. She was discovered on Fernandina Island in 2019. Before her, the last confirmed sighting was in 1906, and the species was believed extinct. Her rediscovery not only astonished scientists, but also sparked a conservation love story, because now researchers are on a mission to find her a mate.
It's like The Bachelor, but with way more lettuce, and you win just by showing up. Literally any male will do. The bar is low for turtles too, it seems.
Unfortunately, her Prince Charming has yet to appear, and for now, Fernanda remains the last known member of her kind, waiting in the volcanic wilderness for a partner who may never arrive. The Wallace's giant bee, aka the world's largest bee, with a wingspan of over 6 centimeters, was last officially recorded in 1981 and presumed extinct. In January 2019, a team of international researchers and conservationists rediscovered this giant bee in Indonesia. Unfortunately, some specimens are now being sold online, highlighting the conservation issues this species faces. Also in Indonesia, on the island of Papua, the Wandiwoi tree kangaroo was feared extinct, with the last confirmed sighting in 1928. In 2018, British naturalist Michael Smith was birding in the Wandiwoi Islands. He observed a strange mammal and took a couple of pictures of it. It was only when he got home and asked around when he realized the magnitude of his discovery. The first confirmed sighting of this species in 90 years.
Extinction isn't always forever. Sometimes nature fakes us out, but most times it is. And it's our job to protect those endangered species. Thankfully, there are people all over the world working day and night to save endangered animals. But they always need support. If you can, consider donating to conservation NGOs. Who knows, you might even help Fernanda find a turtle lover and repopulate her island. That would be something to be proud of.
300 million years ago, the land on Earth became a living nightmare that lasted 50 million years. The beasts that roamed Pangaea were some of the strangest things to ever kill on the planet. This was a time when the ocean was safer than land. This was the Permian hellscape.
We're taking a look at one of the scariest times to be alive in our green Earth's long history, the Permian. Before the dinos took over the Earth, these uncanny-looking species ruled the planet with an iron jaw. One of the first megapredators to appear was the Dimetrodon, about 298 million years ago. Long serrated teeth and an unmistakable back sail make it one of the icons of the Permian. Dimetrodon appeared at a time of rapid species radiation. Their prey was adapting to the New World too. The Carboniferous, the geological period before the Permian, had been a time of rain. The world was dominated by swamps and rainforests. The air had significantly more oxygen than it does today. So invertebrates and amphibians grew large and thrived. During the Permian, the supercontinent got significantly drier, and animals that could lay eggs on land took over. Our ancestors at the time weren't even mammals yet, but were starting to colonize the globe. And while they were doing that, Dimetrodon was probably eating them. Permian predators and prey were in an arms race, getting bigger and stronger. The oldest known Dimetrodon was just about 1¼ meters long, but by 280 million years ago, they had almost quadrupled their size, reaching lengths of up to 4.5 meters. The purpose of the sail is still a bit of a mystery. The most widely accepted theories are that it was a thermoregulation structure, similar to the large ears of elephants. Blood would flow into the sail and cool down before coming back into the animal's core. This makes sense because the largest Dimetrodon were about as long as hippos and as heavy as black bears. But it could have also been used for sexual selection or to intimidate other Dimetrodon. If you saw a Dimetrodon with a huge colorful sail, you could bet your last dollar that it was a healthy guy. Females would love him and males would fear him as much as their prey. This was probably also true for other sailed species of the early Permian. Predators like Sphenacodon, which were built like bull terriers, had a much smaller sail, and it was like a constant signal of its danger. If you've ever seen a video of a dog fight, you know you wouldn't want to be anywhere near them. The small prey of the Sphenacodon basically lived in a kennel of rabid dogs. There were also sailed herbivores, like a Dilophosaurus.
This ancient beast's sail spines had crossbars, suggesting a thick sail that could withstand attacks from some of its predators. Dimetrodons might have targeted these large chunks of meat for a delicious but dangerous meal. These vegetarians could be over 3 meters long, and battles between them made the earth tremble.
Some scientists have wondered, what if the sail was used for sailing? These animals were close to the ground and superficially built kinda like Komodo dragons, but we don't have any evidence suggesting that they were good swimmers. The limbs don't seem to be made for paddling, and the tail wouldn't give the propulsion that, say, a crocodile's tail does. But we're still learning about them, and who knows? We might find a more amphibious species.
After the time of the Dimetrodons, the planet got even drier, and other, more mammal-like synapsids took over. One of the greatest ones was Ankylosaurus. They appeared about 265 million years ago, and for 5 million years, they were the kings of the world. At 5 meters long and 600 kilograms, they were the size of hippos. They also had a reinforced skull, maybe to headbutt each other like rams, and massive fangs to tear the flesh off the bones of other Permian beasts. Because of their gigantic size, they were initially thought to be scavengers, but as we know from modern-day hippos, enormous animals can be quick too. X-rays on Ankylosaurus' skulls suggest that their brains were meant for great balance and coordination, similar to today's land predators. So yes, if you saw one of these in the Permian, it was probably the last thing you ever saw. Rivers, streams, and swamps weren't safe either. If you tried to escape an Ankylosaurus by running into some water, you'd quickly get ambushed by a 100-kilo Rhinosuchus. These amphibian temnospondyls were mostly predators of aquatic animals. They had a palate covered in sharp teeth to hang on to fish and other swimming prey. But these croc frogs could also easily hide in the water and catch anything that got close enough for an ambush. Kinda like this.
But the real screaming part of the nightmare started in the late Permian, when saber-toothed beasts took over the Pangaean landscape. These were the Gorgonopsids. These saber-toothed cat Komodo hybrids were the undisputed kings of the late Permian. Unlike some of the other predators which learned to survive in the desert, most large Gorgonopsids lived in the far north and far south of Pangaea. These were massive steppes with giant herbivores. To kill them, in many species, their canines gradually got larger until they reached about 15 centimeters in length, about the size of an average-sized banana. Eating while having banana-sized teeth sticking out of their jaw was, what we call in the scientific community, a huge hassle. So Gorgonopsids could open their jaws up to 90 degrees. They could basically stab you to death and then swallow you whole.
In the land that eventually became modern-day Russia lived Inostransevia, the beast of the north. This was the largest Gorgonopsian. Their skull was about the size of a grizzly bear's head. They were also about the same weight as Yogi Bear. But from a distance, they looked more like a 3.5-meter-long saber-toothed wolf lizard.
Really, nature wasn't pulling any punches. If you had to design an animal to be as scary and lethal as possible, you'd have a hard time coming up with something as metal as Inostransevia. The combination of size, speed, and killing tools was simply unmatched.
In the south, in what is now South Africa, Rubigia atrox ruled. The largest specimen ever found was just a few inches smaller than the largest Inostransevia, but there's a decent chance that they could get larger and usurp the throne for largest Gorgonopsian of all time. And if that wasn't enough, other smaller members of the family, like Smilosaurus, were equally lethal. This species in particular had the largest canines relative to body size of all Gorgonopsians. And despite being dwarfed by the other species, they were massive. They could be up to 2 meters long, about the same size as a jaguar, but with even longer teeth. Encounters with any of these predators were not survivable. We would have been the easiest prey of their lives. After all, it would have made no sense for them getting that big and powerful unless they needed to catch mighty prey. And yep, even the herbivores were terrifying in the Permian. Scutosaurus was the iconic herbivore of the Permian, at 3 meters long and weighing in at 1 ton. It was a heavyweight armored tank with hard bony plates which in some areas turned into small spikes. It's unclear if it mostly lived on land or water, but wherever it roamed, it commanded the same respect as a wrecking ball. Dicynodonts had keratin beaks to cut off vegetation and tusks to defend themselves. Yes, they were reptile-like mammal relatives with some bird features. Why not? Of course, having to fight off the terrible predators of the time, they had to have a powerful bite and very thick skin. Some species, like Lysowisia, got to be larger than a rhino. Yeah, the line between reptiles and the species that eventually evolved into mammals was grayer than you'd expect. Whenever you do something silly or out of pocket, just remember, we're all descendants of weirdos. It's okay. We could spend all day talking about all the hundreds of species that made the Permian the scariest time to be alive on land. But we're still just starting to understand it, and there's a lot yet to be discovered. Next time we make an episode about the Permian, there will be new amazing creatures to talk about. And that's the beauty of paleontology. There's always new discoveries to keep us fascinated about the world that once was. So, what should we talk about next? Please let me know in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for new episodes every week. Thanks for watching. See ya!
Hey everyone, we have exciting news! We're thrilled to announce the release of Animalogic's very first book, Strange Creatures. This book dives into the most incredible animals we've ever featured on the show, with each chapter packed with my illustrations and stunning full-color images. It's a fun and engaging way to learn about the animal kingdom, and a perfect tool to spark kids' interest in science. Each chapter breaks down an animal's biology, behavior, and all the coolest facts you need to know about these fascinating creatures. Animalogic's Strange Creatures is a must-have addition to your own library, or the perfect gift for an animal lover this upcoming holiday season. Click the link in the description to check it out, and if you can, pre-order a copy. Pre-ordering would help us get an extra bump in the Amazon algorithm, and that would mean the world to us, so thank you so much. Hi, I'm Danielle Dufault, and you're watching Animalogic. Today, we're going to try something a little different, and we're going to talk about the history of T-Rex, or maybe how we perceive T-Rex through the times.
First Tyrannosaurus rex officially described was discovered in the Hell Creek Formation in Montana in 1902 by Barnum Brown and Richard Lull. They dug out 36 bones, including a lower jaw, a femur, a few vertebrae, and the pubic bone. All of them were so massive that Henry Field Osborn, the scientist who described it and gave it its name, said, "I propose to make this animal the type of the new genus Tyrannosaurus," in reference to its size, which greatly exceeds that of any carnivorous land animal hitherto described. I'm sure he sounded just like that.
So it was Osborn's colleague, William D. Matthews, who got to be the first to ever illustrate Tyrannosaurus rex in 1905. To have that feather in your cap.
The body was very upright, almost like a kangaroo, with a tail that would drag on the ground when it walked, and tiny little legs that probably wouldn't help it run very fast. But hey, it was the first ever attempt at figuring out what they looked like based on a specimen that was only about 10% complete.
Honestly, this is the first T-Rex ever drawn, and I've seen worse, really, and much more modern. I'd say that they've done an amazing job considering what they were working with. You can see in the illustration that they've colored in a little darker all the bones that they actually found. And that's exactly what they were working with. You know, some parts of the legs, some parts of the pubis, the jaw, an arm, and some vertebrae. So everything else is kind of extrapolation off of other things that we kind of knew about. But everything back then was gray area in terms of knowledge in paleontology. So, you know, the tail, that was all estimated. The rest of that, the hips, just a guess. But what really surprises me is that they did associate that arm with the rest of the skeleton. It must have been, you know, pretty obvious that it belonged to just one individual and that it wasn't mixed in with a bunch of other bones of other creatures. Because if it were me, I would have seen this tiny arm and assumed that it was a baby or a totally different animal's arm that got mixed in. But no, they worked out what kind of crazy anatomy this animal must have had to have tiny little arms and gigantic bones. Yeah. It's incredible.
In 1906, Osborne used other fossils for extra context, and L.M. Sterling produced an updated version of the illustration.
So the same skeleton and generally the same pose. But as you can see, this one here is a lot more detailed. He used a more traditional anatomical illustration style, and this is something that I still use in my work. And you can also see that he has scaled these bones to each other a little more carefully. So I think this was after having a year of spending a lot of time around these bones. This was more than just coloring in a general map. This was detailing what is present and, you know, what was assumed to be there for the rest of the skeleton.
But of course, these are just skeletons. What we want to see is how people imagined the muscles, the skin,